My husband and I are outraged and heartbroken over the kidnapping of more than 200 Nigerian girls from their school dormitory in the middle of the night.
Your money, $697 million annually, plus the shipments of cash funds madrasas. ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, ISIS Khorasan, terrorist training camps. That's what it's funding.
In these girls, Barack and I see our own daughters. We see their hopes and their dreams. And we can only imagine the anguish their parents are feeling right now.
I served on the Boko Haram committee. Villagers kept telling us that in the middle of the night, helicopters piloted by white people kept landing and offloading guns, goods, and all kinds of and money to these people.
This unconscionable act was committed by a terrorist group determined to keep these girls from getting an education.
The rapid population growth of countries in Africa and the global south, and Nigeria is specifically mentioned, and the political and economic disruption that comes with having a larger population, are a direct threat to America's ability to keep cheaply accessing the raw materials and natural resources in those countries.
We who were on that committee made the mistake of thinking they were French. But now it is an American congressman who's telling us that it was the Americans who did this.
And I want you to know that Barack has directed our government to do everything possible to support the Nigerian government's efforts to find these girls and bring them home.
Over the last few weeks, there's been information coming out that is suggesting, that is claiming, that is alleging that USAID is funding terrorist organizations all over the world, one of which is Boko Haram. If this is true, this means there is a scenario where Michelle Obama was running a Bring Back the Girls campaign, highlighting the issues with Boko Haram, whilst simultaneously the US government was funding that very same organization. This hypocrisy would be absolutely off the scales. So in this video, we're going to follow the words of David Hundeyin. He's a Nigerian activist journalist, I would call him, and he makes the link and the connection between Boko Haram and USAID. I happen to find his work very credible. If you're interested in understanding how the United States could be involved in such a situation, stay tuned. Video to make things crystal clear for the people.
During last week's U.S. congressional hearing on USAID, Congressman Scott Perry calls this day in West Africa with the following comments.
Your money is $697 million annually, plus the shipments of cash funds madrasas. ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, who are funding terrorism, and it's coming through USAID. And it's not just Afghanistan.
In the aftermath of his comments, a number of prominent Nigerian voices spoke in support of Congressman Perry's remarks. One of these voices was former Nigerian Foreign Minister Chidiebere, who said this in a subsequent TV interview with Arise News.
I served on the Boko Haram committee. Villagers kept telling us that in the middle of the night, helicopters piloted by white people kept landing and offloading guns, goods, and money to these people. They have no reason to lie to us.
The first thing I want to say is, I guess an argument could be that you don't know if it was American white people, French white people, German white people, whoever loading off these guns. You don't even know if that was true. But in equal measure, you can say that it's probably likely that these accounts were true. Where do you think a group like Boko Haram, who in those days were a small group in obscurity, could get the kind of resources to do what they've done and continue to do in the region? We're talking about a 10-15 year span of destruction, kidnappings, destabilizing the whole area. Someone's giving them money, and the likelihood is it's someone in the West, because of the stuff that Hundeyin is going to continue revealing here.
Many, however, have treated the story with skepticism because for the most part, the idea that the US government would knowingly and actively fund and equip with terrorists just seems unconscionable. Surely America is all about big business and science and technology and generous foreign aid and sports and show business and cowboys and apple pie and Times Square and the Mount Rushmore. Surely the idea that Uncle Sam would arm and fund some group of semi-literate Islamists calling themselves Boko Haram, which literally translates to books forbidden, to wreak havoc in some economically underdeveloped country on the other side of the planet is a silly, fanciful conspiracy theory, right? Well, no, it's not. How do we know this? Because minus the name Boko Haram, this exact scenario that I just described has happened before. Now, I'm going to let former US Secretary of State Hillary Clinton explain in her own words.
When the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, we had this brilliant idea that we were going to come to Pakistan and create a force of mujahideen, equip them with Stinger missiles and everything else to go after the Soviets inside Afghanistan. We did it because we were locked in this struggle with the Soviet Union. We did not want to see them control Central Asia, and we went to work. And it was President Reagan in partnership with the Congress, led by Democrats, who said, you know what, sounds like a pretty good idea. Let's deal with the ISI and the Pakistani military, and let's go recruit these mujahideen. And great, let's get some to come from Saudi Arabia and other places, importing their Wahhabi brand of Islam so that we can go beat the Soviet Union. And guess what? They retreated. They lost billions of dollars, and it led to the collapse of the Soviet Union.
So they created a proxy war, arming the enemies of their enemy. And that contributed or was maybe the deciding blow to the fall of the Soviet Union. And they're proud of this. She's bragging about it. She's bumping her fist. She's saying it was the Democrats, and she's proud. The question is, how many more times have they done that for the interests of America, or the interests of Big Pharma, or the interests of the IMF, big oil, or the military-industrial complex? As time goes by, it becomes less taboo to talk about the things that happened in the past and how dark they were. Yet we're supposed to believe that now everything is fair and balanced and righteous and good. And there's a clear bad guy and there's a clear good guy, and we're always on the side of the good. But I believe they're only on the side of self-interest.
This operation run by the CIA was codenamed Operation Psychro. It financed the creation of the Afghan Mujahideen before and during the Soviet war in Afghanistan between 1979 and 1989.
I believe the movie Charlie Wilson's War is about this.
The program specifically recruited Islamist groups to fight the Soviets, leaning on their ideological conviction. Now, I know some struggle to accept the notion that Uncle Sam would knowingly and deliberately arm Islamist terrorists, despite America's supposed handling founded around Christian ideals and identity. So I'll let former U.S. National Security Advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski, who personally visited and addressed the Mujahideen, to add a few words of his own.
That land over there is yours. You'll go back to it one day because your fight will prevail and you'll have your home, your mosque back again because your cause is right and God is on your side.
Notice how he said God is on your side. He's touching their emotional buttons. He's talking about the things that he knows matter to them, their God, their mosque, in order to create this emotional attachment so that they will align with him and act in the way that the Americans want them to act.
Now, for those who don't know, the creation of the Mujahideen to fight a proxy war against the Soviets was taken from a U.S. foreign intelligence playbook, which has been used multiple times on multiple continents for similar reasons and with similar outcomes. It was used in Nicaragua when the so-called Contras were financed and armed by the CIA to fight against the country's left-wing Sandinista government. One of the byproducts of this engagement was the creation of Latin America's powerful drug lords who became wealthy enough to bully entire countries. In the case of Afghanistan, U.S. support for Islamists resulted in Afghanistan becoming the world's first Wahhabi extremist theocracy, a crucible that simultaneously incubated both the Taliban and a handsome rich kid from Saudi Arabia who came to join the U.S.-backed Holy War against the Red Army. His name? Osama bin Laden. You might know him as the founder of Al-Qaeda. Now, I know what you're thinking. I can understand why the US might have an incentive to do this in Nicaragua and Afghanistan, to fight communists. But why on earth would they do it in Nigeria? Who or what are they fighting in Nigeria? Once again, I'll let the US government answer that question in its own way. The following excerpts are the summarized takeaways from National Security Study Memorandum 200, also known as the Kissinger Report, a document published by the US National Security Council in 1975 during the tenure of then Secretary of State Henry Kissinger during the Gerald Ford administration. 1. Population of less developed countries, if it outpaces economic development, will likely create suffering and political instability. Instability that might be inimical to U.S. interests. 2. The U.S. relies on many of these countries for natural resources. 3. High birth rates may result in growth in younger individuals who come to oppose established governments if economic conditions do not support livelihoods. 4. American businesses and interests will become vulnerable to interference by governments in these countries, struggling to provide basic humanitarian support for rapidly growing populations.
I did a video a couple of weeks ago. It's called Africa is About to Shock the West, where I go in detail about the demographics of Africa. The demographics are absolutely unbelievable. Africa is growing at an incredible rate. There are African countries, significant African countries, that have 40% of their population under the age of 15. The mean age of an African is 19 or 20. What happens to the West when 1/4, 1/3, 1/2 of the world's population is African? What happens as technology improves and everyone gets internet and infrastructure improves and information spreads and people start educating themselves and understanding how to be more self-actualized, how to come out of a poverty mindset, how to build cities, build nations, build all sorts of things and make Africa rise into a new economic power of the future.
In other words, the rapid population growth of countries in Africa and the Global South, and Nigeria specifically mentioned, and the political and economic disruption that comes with having a larger population, are a direct threat to America's ability to keep cheaply accessing the raw materials and natural resources in those countries, which it is dependent on. The report went on to recommend a range of remedial action to ensure that people in countries on the other side of the planet do not have babies at a rate that the US government thinks will threaten the economic supremacy of the United States. For reference, Nigeria is Africa's most populous country and has been projected to achieve a population exceeding 400 million by 2050. Nigeria's gross domestic product is also estimated to hit $13 trillion by 2075, which would place it among the world's top 5 economies. Now, in the world of Henry Kissinger's nightmare, parts of the world that currently have the most natural resources and the least capacity to use them would have the population density and industrial capacity to make use of their own natural resources, which, needless to say, will completely upend the entire structure of the entire global economic system as we know it. So, if you're the government whose foreign policy is still driven by this Kissinger doctrine, what do you do to fight such an enemy? You obviously cannot physically murder 200 million Nigerians. I heard nobody tell them that they must freeze their national ambitions or stop having children because you need their resources more than they do. So what do? You bust out the old US foreign intelligence playbook with a few modifications and you fund proxies to do it for you. These proxies will thoroughly destabilize entire swathes of the country, leaving them completely uninhabitable, so that people who live there will have to flee. They will make it impossible to carry out large-scale agriculture across most of the country, making the country food insecure and dependent on imports and solutions like GMOs with Terminator seed technology.
In the last video I made, titled Trump's Just Proved This About American Nations, I used the word of Jeffrey Sachs, who is a high-level economist and advisor to many countries around the world. And he talks about what the CIA does for a living, to quote his own words.
It's called a regime change operation. There have been about 100 of them by the United States, many in your countries, and many all over the world. That's what the CIA does for a living.
So far, everything that David Hundeyin is saying lines up very well.
They will make it impossible to carry out large-scale agriculture across most of the country, making the country food insecure and dependent on imports and solutions like GMOs with Terminator seed technology, which directly hands over the country's food security effectively into US government hands. So the US government gets to determine how many people get to eat and how many people get to die of starvation. And nobody suspects a fate. Very elegant solution to a very knotty problem.
Here is the noble Michelle Obama. I don't know if she knows about the way this worked, specifically for Boko Haram. She probably didn't. But nevertheless, it suits the interests of America to have America's mum, America's first lady, feel concern for the ladies, for the girls who don't get to get an education because of Boko Haram. Nicely covers the fact that they're funding these guys. By now, I hope the veil has been lifted from your eyes. I hope that you see the way the geopolitics of the world works for what it is. And it's so important for Africans and every citizen in the world to gain as much knowledge on these situations as possible so that we can start to try and do something to prevent this happening again. Big shout out to David Hundeyin. I hope all of you go and follow him on his YouTube channel and X. I'm sure many of you have opinions that you want to write in the comments. Feel free. But if you don't have something to write, but you want to show support for the channel, would it be too much for me to ask for you to write the words David in the comments section? It lets me know that you made it to the end of the video, that you're supporting the channel, and you want me to continue doing what I'm doing. It also gives a little shout out to David Hundeyin, who we very much support on this channel. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video. Peace.
Thank you.